The grease under Jian's fingernails had been there for 3 days. She'd tried to scrub it out twice, but the particular compound they used in the Yonsei 7 secondary thruster assembly had a way of bonding to skin like it had opinions about it. She didn't mind. She'd grown up in her uncle's garage in Ijeongbu, and clean hands had always seemed like a waste of time to her anyway. Besides, she was elbow deep in the motivator housing right now, and clean hands would only last about 4 seconds. Jian. The voice came over her earpiece, clipped and precise. Commander Sukwon, from the bridge. We're picking up a Velhari distress beacon, Sector 7 Gamma, about 40 minutes out. She didn't pull her head out of the housing. I'm in the middle of something. I know, but Lieutenant Bora is down with the lung fever, and you're the only one rated on the rescue pod. Jian closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she pulled her head out, banged it on the panel above her, which she did approximately every third time, no matter how many times she promised herself she'd remember the clearance, and grabbed her rag. Fine, give me 10 minutes. You have 8. She was in the pod bay in 7, still wearing her coveralls with the hole in the left knee. The Velhari ship was called the Sorveth Null, and it was dying. Jian could see that much from the pod's approach scanner. The aft section had taken some kind of impact, debris strike probably, though she'd seen stranger things out this far, and the propulsion core was venting gas in slow, rhythmic pulses that reminded her unpleasantly of labored breathing. The ship was elegant in the way Velhari ships always were, all flowing curves and bioluminescent panels, built to look like something that had grown rather than been constructed. It was about 30% longer than the Yonsei 7, and it was currently drifting toward a debris field at a speed that would make a bad situation catastrophic in approximately 40 minutes. She'd done harder approaches. She told herself that while she was doing the approach. The docking was manual. The Velhari's automated systems had gone down with the propulsion core, and it took her 3 attempts and a significant amount of quiet profanity before the magnetic seal caught. She ran her post-dock checklist in her head because the laminated card had been missing for 6 months. Then she grabbed her kit, popped the hatch, and went through. The corridor inside was dim and smelled of something like burnt copper and rain, which was just what Velhari ships always smelled like, but sharper now, threaded through with the acrid bite of whatever the propulsion unit had been leaking. Emergency lighting cast everything in a low amber glow. Jian kept her hand on the wall and moved toward the life sign reading she'd gotten from outside. 2 beings, midship, one significantly weaker than the other. She found them in what appeared to be the navigation chamber. The first one was dead. She recognized that within about 2 seconds and moved past. The way her uncle had taught her. You help the ones you can help. The second one was alive, which she determined by the fact that it made a sound when she crouched beside it. A low, resonant tone that she felt more in her chest than heard with her ears, which was how Velhari expressed pain, she vaguely remembered. She'd met exactly one Velhari before, briefly, at a trade station near Callisto. They were tall. Very tall. This one was folded against the base of the navigation console like something had thrown it there, all long limbs and iridescent skin that shifted between blue and deep green in the amber light. The face, if face was the right word, had the wide-set photoreceptors and the speaking membrane below them that she recognized. Right now the membrane was partially closed, which meant the Velhari equivalent of unconscious, or near enough. One of its arms was bent wrong. She didn't need a medical degree to see that. Hey, she said, which was stupid because it couldn't understand her, but she always talked during rescues. It was a nervous habit. I'm Jian. I'm a rescue technician. I'm going to help you, okay? Just hold on. She opened her kit. His name, she learned later, was Tavith. Specifically, Tavith of the 3rd Resonance Choir of House Sorveth, which was apparently a significant designation, though this was not communicated to her until considerably after the moment she dragged him through the docking hatch and yelled at Sukwon to get the medical bay ready. In the immediate term, he was just the extremely large, unconscious alien she was trying not to drop while navigating a doorframe that really wasn't built for the purpose. He's very tall, said Dr. Hammond, standing in the medical bay doorway with an expression that suggested he'd been hoping for a simpler Tuesday. Yes, said Jian, help me. They got him on the table. Hammond did what Hammond did, with the universal translator running on his tablet, using the medical database that had been compiled by 3 different species and only sometimes agreed with itself. Jian stood in the corridor outside, realized she was still holding her kit, and sat down on the floor because her legs had done that thing where they quietly informed her they were done now. She ate a protein bar. It tasted like chalk and artificial strawberry. She ate it anyway. The Velhari woke up about 2 hours later, and the first thing he did was speak. Jian was back in the medical bay by then because Hamin had paged her with the message. He's asking for the small, loud human, which she chose not to be offended by. She came in to find Taveth sitting up on the table, or trying to, complicated by the fact that his arm was immobilized, with his speaking membrane working rapidly and producing sounds that the translator was gamely attempting to process. "You are the one who retrieved me," the translator said, in a flat mechanical voice, about 4 seconds after he stopped speaking. "From the Sorveth Null." "That's me," said Jian. "Jian Park, rescue technician, USEF Yonsei 7. He looked at her for a long moment. His photoreceptors were extraordinary up close, layered, deep amber, nothing like eyes and yet unmistakably purposeful. They moved from her face to her coveralls to her kit on the counter and back. "You are primitive rank," the translator said, "not command." Jian blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your garment, the damage, your hands." A pause. "I expected a command officer." She looked down at her coveralls, at the hole in the knee, at the grease she still hadn't gotten off. Then she looked back at him. "You're welcome," she said. It wasn't a great start. This was the thing about Velhari, as Jian came to understand over the next several days while the Yonsei 7 carried Taveth toward the nearest Velhari station, where his people could collect him. They organized everything by rank and resonance, which were apparently the same concept expressed differently, and rank was communicated through appearance in a system so deeply embedded in their culture that Taveth genuinely hadn't meant it as an insult. He was simply observing, the way you might note a colleague's department by their badge. Jian was not wearing the right badge, therefore she was not command. Therefore his expectation had been misaligned. She explained this to herself carefully, over several days, whenever she felt irritated about it. It helped about 40% of the time. Taveth was not a bad patient. He was quiet, which Jian appreciated. He asked clear questions and listened to the answers, which she appreciated more. He ate whatever Hamin provided without complaint, even the protein rations that everyone on the ship complained about. When his arm hurt, which it clearly did, based on the low tonal sounds he made sometimes when he thought he was alone, he didn't make a production of it. He just sat with it. She found herself checking on him more than she strictly needed to. "You keep returning," he observed one evening when she came by with a calibration reader she definitely needed for an unrelated maintenance task that happened to take her past the medical bay. "Is this a duty requirement?" "I'm just passing through," she said. He made a sound she hadn't heard from him before, the membrane fluttering briefly at the edges. Later she would learn it was the Velhari version of quiet amusement, but at the time she just felt obscurely caught out about something. She sat down in the chair by the door because she was already there. "How's the arm?" she asked. "Healing," he said. "The human medical techniques are unexpected." Is that a compliment or an observation? Another edge flutter. Both. On the 4th day, the Yonsei 7 received a distress signal from a different source entirely, and everything changed. The signal was coming from a set of coordinates that hadn't been in active use since before Jian was born. The ruins of Earth's first deep space construction platform, the Hangul station, which had been decommissioned in 2087 and left in a slow drift orbit while the paperwork about what to do with it had proceeded at the usual governmental pace. It was mostly scrap now. Vast, drifting, ice-covered scrap, which was why the signal was so bewildering. "It's an old Earth frequency," said Ensign Duray from the communications console. She had the look of someone trying to decide between excitement and alarm, and landing somewhere in the middle. "Pre-standardization encoding. Like, really old." "How old?" Sakwan asked. "The encoding format matches late 21st century, before the Galactic Compact protocols." Jian was on the bridge for this, because she'd been running a diagnostic on the navigation systems, not because she was supposed to be there. She stayed very still and hoped no one would ask her to leave. "Is the station supposed to still have functional systems?" Sakwan said. "No," she said, before she could stop herself. Everyone looked at her. "Sorry, but no, the Hangul was fully decommissioned. Core systems wiped." I know because my uncle's company did some of the salvage work. There shouldn't be anything running on her. Seokwon looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Set a course." The Hangul station looked, in Jian's honest assessment, like a very large abandoned spider. It had been built in modules, the way everything was built in those early years, because humans hadn't yet figured out how to think big. Or rather, they'd figured it out but not yet trusted themselves to do it. 8 modules connected by long corridors, frozen in whatever position they'd been in when the joints had locked up with cold and time. The solar arrays were folded and pitted with micro-impact scars. The whole thing was dusted with the fine sparkling ice that collected on deep space structures, making it look, at the right angle, almost beautiful. Jian was standing at the observation port, looking at it, when she realized Taveth was standing beside her. He'd started moving around the ship under his own power 2 days ago, with his arm in the stabilizer brace Hammond had printed for him. He moved carefully, because the Yonsei 7's corridors were not built for someone his height, but he moved. "This is a human construction," he said. "Old one, early days. It appears non-functional." "It's supposed to be," she paused, "but something on it is transmitting." He was quiet for a moment. The ice on the station caught the light from the nearby star and threw back a cold glitter. "Velhari historians," he said eventually, "have catalogued several cycles of human technological development. The consensus classification is pre-spacefaring industrial society transitioning to basic interstellar." Jian turned to look at him. "Basic interstellar. It is a technical designation. We've had ships in deep space for over 100 years. Basic interstellar," he said again. But there was something uncertain in his membrane now. A quality she was beginning to learn meant he was reconsidering something. "It refers to propulsion capability. Range. The consensus," he stopped. "The consensus was built before anyone came and looked at the Hangul," Jian said quietly. She turned back to the port. The station gleamed and drifted. "Something in there just woke up," she said. "After 40 years of nothing. And I want to know why." They took the rescue pod across, Jian and Taveth and Ensign Dare, because Dare had the communications background, and Jian had the maintenance background, and Taveth had, well, Taveth had insisted, and Seokwon had looked at him for a moment, and then looked at Jian, and something had passed between the two of them that Jian didn't fully catch. "You don't have to come," she told him, as they suited up in the pod bay. "I am curious," he said. "This is permitted. It's just an old station, probably just a power cell misfiring." "Yes," he said, and followed her into the pod. The docking was easier this time. Jian got it on the second try and felt unreasonably pleased with herself. The Hangul was cold in the way that only truly abandoned places were cold. Not just temperature, but quiet and dark, and the particular kind of still that happens when nothing has moved in a very long time. Their helmet lights swept across corridors that looked like geological strata of human ambition. The original metal walls, the later composite patches, the wiring bundles that had seemed so advanced in 2071 and looked now like something from a history lesson. Every few meters there were markings in Korean and English, little stenciled labels telling long-gone crew members which direction led to the galley and which to the emergency airlocks. Jian found herself reading them as they walked. 보조 동력, secondary power. 선원구역, crew quarters.
3구역 비상구.
Section 3, emergency exit. She'd studied this period in school, the same way everyone did. The years when humans had built with everything they had into the dark, not knowing if anyone was out there, not knowing if it mattered, just going. Because that was what people did. The signal was coming from the station's central core module, the original heart of the structure where the primary systems had lived. Dare was tracking it on her handheld scanner, her breath making small clouds in the cold. Taveth walked behind them both, ducking door frames with practiced ease now, his photoreceptors moving steadily across every surface. The core module's pressure door was frozen in the half-open position, which required Jiyeon to apply the hydraulic spreader from her kit, and then her shoulder, and then a considerable amount of frustration before it gave. The room beyond was larger than she'd expected, cylindrical, running the full length of the module, lined with equipment racks that were dark and cold, except for one console along the far wall, where a single amber light was pulsing steadily, like something breathing. "Oh," said Dure softly. Jian walked to it. The console was an Aiden unit, Autonomous Intelligence Data and Emergency Navigator, an early model AI system that had been standard on large construction platforms before the compact protocols required more sophisticated systems. This particular unit had a designation plate that read Aiden 7/Hangul Station/installation date, March 14, 2069. It had been running in some minimal capacity for 57 years. "Hello," it said, in a thin voice that sounded like a radio transmission from far away. "I have been waiting for a maintenance check. I note that my scheduled service is significantly overdue." Jian sat down on a frozen equipment case. "Yeah," she said, "I'd say so. Are you a maintenance technician?" She looked down at her coveralls, at the hole in the knee. "That's what I'm told." "Good," said Aiden 7. "I have a great deal to report." What Aiden 7 had to report took approximately 4 hours, and by the end of it, Jian was sitting on the floor. Dade had filled 3 data tablets, and Taveth had not moved from the position he'd taken near the door. Standing perfectly still, his photoreceptors fixed on the console with an expression that Jian was beginning to be able to read, and what it said right now was something close to shock. The Hangul station had, in its operational years, conducted deep survey work throughout a region of space that was now charted Velhari territory. Aiden 7 had logged, recorded, and filed detailed observations of 11 planetary systems, 243 astronomical anomalies, and one significant discovery that had never made it back to Earth before the station was decommissioned. A structure, not a natural structure, not a rock formation or a crystal growth, or any of the geological phenomena that sometimes fooled early sensors, a constructed structure, in a system that had been classified as uninhabited, built from materials that matched no known natural deposit, but matched, very precisely, materials used in early Velhari construction. "I transmitted this data to Earth through standard channels," Aiden 7 said. "At the time of decommissioning, I had received no confirmation of receipt. I have continued to transmit at intervals. The intervals have become longer as my power reserves have diminished. I am currently operating at 4% capacity. I estimate I would have lost function within 6 of your Earth months." Jian looked at Taveth. He was still standing very still. "Taveth," she said carefully, "the system coordinates AIDEN 7 is describing. Do you know them?" A long pause. The membrane worked briefly, closed, worked again. "The system," he said, "is known to Velhari historians. It is considered sacred, uninhabited, ancient." Another pause. "The structure you describe would be from the time of the first choir, before recorded history." "How long ago?" 11,000 years. The cold in the module felt different after that. Deeper. "The Velhari didn't know it was there," Derry said quietly, looking at her tablet. "It was catalogued as geologically unremarkable." Taveth's voice had changed quality. There was something rougher in it, something that the translator rendered flatly, but that Jian could hear underneath the machine smoothing. "The surveys were incomplete. The consensus was that no pre-compact civilization had reached." He stopped again. "A primitive planet," he said softly, "would not have found this." Jian thought about Aiden 7, running on 4% power for 57 years, patiently transmitting into the dark. "We found a lot of things," she said. "Nobody came to look." There was a period, after that, of complicated logistics. The data had to be transmitted. Sukwon had to be briefed, and then the Yonsei 7's command AI, and then USEF Regional Command, which took several hours and involved a great deal of hold music. Aiden 7's core had to be carefully extracted from the console, which Jian did herself, working slowly in the cold with her hands that had been warm once and were now very much not, and brought back to the ship. The Hangul station, Sukwon decided, would be tagged for preservation rather than final salvage. The paperwork on that would proceed at the usual governmental pace, but this time it seemed likely to resolve. Taveth, meanwhile, was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Jian noticed this the way she noticed most things about him now, sideways, while she was paying attention to something else. He ate dinner in the mess and didn't speak to anyone. He stood at the observation port where they'd stood together before and looked at the stars in the direction of his home systems. She watched him do this for a while from down the corridor, trying to decide if he wanted to be alone. She decided he probably wanted to be alone. Then she went to stand next to him anyway. "You don't have to talk," she said. He didn't for a while. The stars moved slowly past the port as the Yonsei 7 turned on its transit heading. "My people," he said finally, "have held a consensus about humans for 300 of your years, since the first contact period." A pause. The consensus was not disrespectful. It was simply a placement, a categorization. "Basic interstellar," Jian said. "Yes, young, developing. Not unintelligent, but limited, still learning." He was quiet for a moment. The Hangul. That unit, AIDEN 7, it operated alone, in the dark, for 57 years, transmitting data it believed was important, on the possibility that someone would eventually come to receive it. "Old machines," Jian said. "We build things to last." "It is not the machine that I am—" He stopped. Tried again. Humans did not know, when they built that station, whether it mattered. They did not know if they would ever reach the stars in any meaningful sense. They did not know if anyone was listening. And yet they recorded everything, filed it properly, kept transmitting. She thought about her uncle's garage, the walls covered in notes about every engine he'd ever touched, even the ones that never ran again. "Somebody might need to know this someday," he always said. "That's just what you do," she said. "You pay attention. You write it down. You hope it's useful." Taveth turned to look at her. His photoreceptors, in the low light of the corridor, had shifted to a deeper amber, almost gold, and she'd learned enough by now to know that was something like feeling strongly about something, though the precise translation was still unclear to her. "The consensus," he said carefully, "will need to be revised." "I'm not worried about the consensus," she said. "What are you worried about?" It was such a direct question. In his way, Velhari didn't dance around things, she'd learned. They simply asked, that it caught her off guard. She laughed a little, which surprised both of them. "I'm worried that the Aiden core got banged up when I extracted it and we've lost half the data. I'm worried about the motivator housing I was halfway through when you called in your distress signal. I'm worried my uncle is going to see the news about the Hangul and call me and will be on the line for 4 hours and I'll miss my maintenance rotation." Taveth made the edge flutter sound. "These are small concerns." "Small concerns are the real ones," she said. "The big ones take care of themselves eventually. It's the small ones that need attention." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your hands." She looked down. She'd finally gotten the grease off, in the Hangul's cold, replaced now with a long reddish mark from where she'd been pressing the hydraulic spreader. "What about them?" "On the station. You worked for 2 hours in temperatures that your suit was not—" He paused, consulting some interior translation. "Not fully adequate for. To extract the Aiden core. You did not mention the cold." "It wasn't relevant." It affected the quality of your work." "The work was fine." "I observed you," he said. "Your hands were shaking during the final extraction. You completed it anyway. You did not stop." She didn't know what to say to that, exactly. It was such a specific thing to have noticed. She'd been focused on the connector housing and the cold and whether she was going to drop the core, and she hadn't been thinking about being observed. "You were watching me work?" she said finally. "You are—" The membrane moved in a way she hadn't seen before, something more complex, a ripple that moved from center to edge and back. "I find I watch you frequently. I am uncertain what to do with this information." The corridor was very quiet. Down the way, someone in the mess dropped something metallic, and it rang against the floor, and then silence came back. "Well," said Jian after a moment, "I don't know what to tell you. I'm just a maintenance tech." "You are the person who came into a dying ship and carried me out," he said, with a straightforwardness that made her chest do something inconvenient. "You are the person who found something that will change what my people know about their own history. You are the person who worked with shaking hands in the cold, Because you believed it was worth doing. A pause. I do not think just is the right word. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. His photoreceptors were very gold. The next Velhari pickup station is 4 days out, she said finally. Yes. That's 4 days. She wasn't sure what she was saying, exactly. She wasn't sure he was sure either. But he made the edge flutter sound again, softer this time, and she found herself smiling at it like she'd been doing it for years. 4 days, he agreed. The AIDEN 7 core was intact. Jiyeon confirmed this the next morning with a full diagnostic that took 3 hours and required her to borrow Dade's secondary scanner because she'd left hers on the Hangul and was very annoyed at herself about it. The data was all there. All 243 anomaly logs, all 11 system surveys, and the structure. The impossible 11,000-year-old thing that a lone AI unit had found and dutifully recorded and then shouted into the dark for 57 years because nobody had told it to stop. She wrote up her maintenance report on the motivator housing, which she finished that afternoon. She also wrote a formal salvage assessment of the Hangul that was far more detailed than anyone had asked for, but she kept thinking about those stenciled labels in the corridors, Bojo Dongyuk and Sonon Kuyuk, and she wanted to get it right. Tavith spent a significant portion of the day on the communication system, speaking to Velhari authorities in long, complex tonal exchanges that the ship's translator couldn't fully process. Jiyeon didn't ask about it. Whatever was happening on that end was its own enormous unfolding situation, and she suspected it would continue to unfold for years. In the evening, they ate in the mess together, which had become, without either of them formally deciding it had, a thing they did. Taveth ate whatever Haman provided without complaint, as always, though she'd started putting in requests to the food system for things that were higher in the mineral compounds that Velhari metabolisms processed better, because she'd looked it up. He'd noticed. He hadn't said anything about it directly, but he'd looked at her in that gold photoreceptor way. The structure, he said over what passed for dinner. The Velhari authorities are. There is no single word in the translator. Disturbed is close. Humbled may also be close. Both at once? Often, when something is important, yes. Jiyeon pushed food around her plate. What happens now, with the history, the first choir, all of it? Expeditions, scholarship, many, many arguments among historians. The edge flutter, which she'd come to think of almost as his laugh. It will take generations to fully understand, but it begins now, because of a machine that kept working in the dark. Because of a lot of things, Jiyeon said. He looked at her. You and the other Velhari surveys missed it, she said, not unkindly. Because you'd already decided what you were looking for. We didn't know what we were looking for, so we wrote everything down. She paused. That's not better or worse, it's just different. You are being generous. I'm being accurate. You've been in space for 1,000 years longer than us. We're going to miss things you catch and catch things you miss. That's how it works. She looked up. That's how it should work, I think, if everyone's paying attention. He was quiet. Then, you are not what I expected when you came through that hatch. With my coveralls and my hole in the knee? Yes, softer now. I expected, as I said, command rank, formal, the approach the Velhari would make in that situation. I'm sorry to disappoint. You did not disappoint, he said, and there was nothing complicated in it, just the flat statement of a fact he'd assessed and arrived at, and it landed in her chest like a warm weight and stayed there. She looked at her food, then at him. Then she said, when you get back to your people, with all of this, what happens to you? There will be obligations. The data must be presented. The expedition must be organized. My house will be significantly affected by this discovery. He paused. I will be busy. Right, she nodded. Of course. But, he said, not indefinitely. She looked up. The expedition to the structure, he said, will require a crew with varied expertise. Navigation, survey, maintenance of older equipment which the site will require, as it has not been visited. A pause that felt very deliberate. The USEF maintains a formal exchange program with Velhari expeditionary teams. I have noted this in the compact records. I know about the exchange program, she said carefully. I've never applied. You should consider it, he said, for the expedition. For the expedition, she repeated. Yes. His membrane made the complex ripple again. And for other reasons, which I am still uncertain how to articulate in your language, but which I think you understand. She did understand. She was fairly sure she understood. Her heart was doing something thoroughly unprofessional, and she was choosing not to think about that too carefully right now. I'll look into the application process, she said. Good, said Taveth. 3 days later, the Yonsei 7 reached the Velhari pickup station at coordinate 7 Gamma 221, and the exchange was formal and significant in ways that Jian mostly observed from a respectful distance, while Sukwon handled the diplomatic elements that were above her pay grade. She was in the pod bay, running the post-trip diagnostic on the rescue pod, when Taveth came to find her. He had to duck through the bay door. He always had to duck through doors, but she'd noticed he'd gotten a little less careful about it lately, the particular care of someone in an unfamiliar space relaxing into something more like habit. She was aware of this. She was aware of a lot of things about him at this point, in a way she was only now fully acknowledging to herself. The data transfer is complete, he said. The Velhari Authority has formally acknowledged the discovery of the Hangul station records and initiated the expedition process. Your USEF command has been notified of Earth's. The word the Authority used was contribution. There are others, but that was the formal one. Contribution, Jian said. That's a good word. It is a word that will need to be used more often, he paused. I have spoken to your commander Sukwon. He informs me that your service record will receive a formal commendation. She kept her eyes on the pod's exterior panel. I was just doing my job. You retrieved me from a dying ship, he said. You identified an emergency signal that everyone else might have dismissed. You extracted a historical record that changes the known history of my people. You did this in damaged work clothing with cold hands. A pause. At what point does just doing my job stop being accurate? She turned around. He was standing in the bay, all tall and careful and with his arm in its brace and his photoreceptors very much gold, and she thought about the Hangul, about Iden 7 transmitting into the dark for 57 years on 4% power, on the chance that someone would eventually come. You paid attention. You wrote it down. You hoped it was useful. I've already started the exchange program application, she said. Something shifted in his expression. The membrane, the receptors. Something that the translator couldn't capture, but that she could read now. This specific Velhari quality she'd learned in 4 days. This particular stillness that meant something was landing somewhere it mattered. The first expedition departs in approximately 5 of your months, he said. There will be considerable preparation, logistics, historical consultation. It would be... A pause. It would be efficient to have someone who understands old machinery on the planning team. Efficient, she said. Yes. The edge flutter. Among other things. Outside the Bayport, the Velhari station turned slowly against the stars, its bioluminescent panels cycling through colors she didn't have names for yet. The Yonsei 7 hummed around them, the motivator housing running clean and smooth now, all her careful work paying off in the steady vibration she could feel through the deck plates. Jian thought, 5 months is not very long. She also thought, it's long enough to learn a few more things. Okay, she said. Efficient works for me. She held out her hand, the one with the faded grease stain that hadn't quite gone, the one with the reddish mark from the hydraulic spreader that had faded to pink now. He looked at it for a moment in the way he sometimes looked at human gestures, parsing them. Then he reached out with his good arm and touched his fingers to hers. Not a handshake, not quite, just the specific contact of one set of hands against another, warm even through the difference, intentional. 4 months and 29 days, he said. She laughed. Counting already? I find I am precise, he said, about things that matter. The bay door was open behind him, and through it came the faint smell of the Velhari station, something like ozone and something like green leaves, strange and new. Jian breathed it in. There was so much space out there, so much dark. And in all of it, scattered like stars, Things worth paying attention to. She had never once thought that wasn't worth the cold.